Just explain the kind of household you grew up in and the belief system that was there.
Yeah, I mean, my parents were always pretty religious, and when I was 16, my dad decided to become a preacher. My mom and I were sitting in the church at the time. We'd gone to church like 3 times a week since I was a kid, and my dad like just started screaming and shaking, and we were like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And my mom had like started to suspect that I was gay at that time, and so we were just sitting there in the pew like, uh-oh. Then my dad became a preacher, and that was when everything became, you know, much more fundamentalist in our household.
Well, you knew your sexuality when you were about 8 or 9 years
Yeah, like 3rd grade.
Yeah.
Mr. Smith was too hot to ignore.
and so, was there a point where you thought, I can talk to them about this? I can come out to my parents?
No, it was never an option. I mean, I grew up whenever, if you can remember Matthew Shepard, who was beaten and killed in the U.S., that was like the era where I grew up. And every show that I watched, every film that I saw, like if you were openly gay, you either died of AIDS or, you know, you were out clubbing, and there was no like in between. You know, I think we saw Queer as Folk. Like I saw one episode of Queer as Folk, and I was like, I don't know that world.
Yeah,
you know, there was no.
But it was a friend that outed you, an ex-friend that outed you to your parents.
Yeah, and then, he outed me, and
Why?
To get into some pretty weird stuff. So he outed me and said, you know, Garrett's gay, and my dad took me into his bedroom, and he said, you know, I've talked to a few preachers. I called them after I heard this, and there's only one way forward here. Either you go to conversion therapy or you won't see your family and we won't pay for your education.
So incredibly confusing, because not only are you dealing with your own sexuality and those feelings, this horrific trauma that you went through, the loss of your family, the loss of your faith also, I imagine, because everything you believed in, you're now being told is that's against all of that. You did go and have sort of one-on-one therapy, and you describe it as shaming therapy. This was just a way to...
It was like 6 months of sitting across from someone, and after each session he would say, okay, you know, God hates that, God doesn't want you to be that way, and here's a Bible verse to fix it. And it just felt, it was 6 months of that.
Bear it.
So when you then came to enrolling in the sort of full-on therapy, you said it was harder to get into than it was to get into college.
It was. There was an application process that required me to have 2 letters of recommendation. I mean, the way that I see it now is that they wanted to ensure that the people that came in wouldn't write an expose, like I eventually did. And they wanted to make sure that we were all, you know, good Christians who believed the same things that they did. And, you know, the application itself is quite insane if you look at it now.
What do they ask you?
They ask you if you've ever done, like, you know, used a Ouija board, or if you've ever done yoga. Like, they believed all of these things were sinful. Basically, anything that could distract you from God or from healing was considered a sin.
So what was it like? What was the therapy?
Yeah, I mean, I describe it as talk therapy. It's sort of psychotherapy in a group. They sat us next to people who were dealing with a lot of different issues. So some people were dealing with pedophilia. I was sitting next to a man at, you know, 19 who was dealing with pedophilia. And I was sitting next to another woman who was dealing with bestiality, and we were all seen as sexual addicts. They borrowed from Alcoholics Anonymous. They borrowed from everything. You know, they were stealing from Freud. They were stealing from Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of things that we've, you know, decided don't work anymore, like Freud's old theories, were suddenly being touted as cures.
And how did it make you feel? Because eventually, I mean, you were only there for 2 weeks, and you finished before the end because it all just got too much. But very quickly in that time, what it did to you as a human being was horrible. Took you to the brink.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a culmination of something that I'd been dealing with my whole life. I always say you don't have to be in conversion therapy to be in conversion therapy. You know, you just grow up in these small towns where people tell you how to stand, how to act. They shame you if you're a sissy, etc. You know, so like it was just sort of everything condensed in that period of time, and it felt like I could suddenly see it for what it was. Like the bigotry was just obvious, which was, in a weird, ironic way, kind of helpful.
Yeah,
you know?
isn't it?
And your mother came to pick you up.
Yeah, so we had to do this ridiculous exercise that was very cheesy. We had to sit across from a chair, and we had to pretend that our invisible father was sitting there, and I was asked to yell at that father and say, I hate you. And I said, well, I don't hate my father. I feel very disappointed. And they said, well, we know what you actually feel, and you're not trying hard enough. And, you know, by that point, I'd already read 1984.
It's not very Christian, is it?
No, it's not.
To get you to hate your father.
Well, that's what I thought. I thought these people who are trying to show me what compassion is and be good Christians are asking me to hate my father, which it suddenly felt starkly, you know, insane.
Well, your mother, from that moment onwards, has always supported you. I think your dad has tried to deal with it the best way that he can.
Yeah.
And for you, sort of growing up then, having had this, and did you begin to accept your sexuality? Because it did stay with you for a long time.
Yeah, it took a long time. I mean, I didn't write a word of the book for a decade because I just wanted to put it behind me. I felt so stupid. You know, I went to college right after that again, and I was, you know, studying Darwin for the first time because no one allowed me to even know what evolution was.